Welcome SAT test takers and aspirants. Today we are going to look at the March 2020 SAT test. Now, while we are taking the test, we are going to use our personal order of difficulty to sift through the 5 passages in order to choose the one that seems easiest to us in order to save time later. But for the sake of convenience, I'm going to follow the order, and today we are going to solve the very first passage on the test. So we're going to read the blurb first, after which we are going to go for whichever reading strategy that speaks to us. Some of us may not even want to read the passage, because reading the passage, does not exactly give you scores, while others may want to skim. That means read about 100 words within 30 seconds, just reading for nouns and verbs, while others still who have, especially the ones who have practiced reading quite a bit, would like to maybe read the entire passage before moving on to the question, so you have a clear idea of what you're dealing with. Whatever be your reading strategy, I'm going to move directly to the questions. The very first question I can see is a line reference question. Using the phrase uncertain circle, narrator most nearly means that the family members are. So we're going to go up to line 1 and read as much as is required. There they all stood, an uncertain circle, and then her grandfather came forward, greeted her mother, shook hands with her father. Okay. So this is when you're supposed to be using prediction to predict your answer. So uncertain circle to me means that they were a little hesitant, maybe waiting for grandfather's cue. Now it's time to move on to process of elimination, because the SAT is about the least worst answer. Answer choice A says disoriented, unusually difficult journey, nothing about the journey, we can eliminate it. Self-conscious, tentative about interacting, yes, because waiting for cue. Suspicious, out of scope. Dependent, reassurance, too good to be true, it's a trap. Therefore, B is my answer, because I have evidence for the same. Moving on to question 2 and 3, they do not look like line reference questions. Neither does 4. I'm going to move to 5 based on lines 21 to 32. Which choice best describes Jess's initial reaction to being addressed as Yorula? So for the ones who have not really read the passage at all, it's a good idea for you to read 5 lines above and 5 lines below to really get an idea of what you're dealing with. She froze, not knowing what to say or do. Of course, she knew that Yorula was her Yoruba name that her grandfather had asked in a letter for her to be called when her mother had held a Nigerian naming ceremony. Yorula means gold. She knew all this, but nobody had ever called her Yorula, not even her mother, whom she could now see from the corner of her eye, making anxious, silent gestures for her to go to her grandfather. Okay. So what was her initial reaction? Resents, out of scope. Recognizes, cannot recall precise meaning, nothing about meaning. Not given, startled, remembered, none of that. Aware, unable to acknowledge, yes, because nobody ever called her that, so D is my answer. Moving on. Which choice best supports the idea that Jess is familiar with some of the customs that her mother's family observes? Although not a line reference question, you can just go back, read these windows to be able to find the answer. So let's do that. 23 to 26. Do not be afraid of using your pencil on the test like I'm doing right now. She knew Yoruba name, letter, ceremony. So this part does mention a custom, so we're going to hold on to it. 29 to 32. I think this is a very good example of how Not all parts of the passage is important. Questions are not exactly going to be asked from everywhere. There are some parts which are always going to be more important from where multiple questions can be asked, which is why I'm not exactly mentioning the question numbers over the passage, because that could potentially confuse you. Coming back, nobody, not even mother. Now see, corner of her eye, making anxious silent gestures. Okay, nothing about any custom. So want to move on. 42 to 46. She could not make herself move forward, so she stayed where she was. Avoided touch, quietly, firmly. Again, nothing about any custom. We can move on to 59 to 63. Okay. Again, for those of you who haven't read the passage at all, you may want to read a little bit more, making a window of 5 lines above, 5 lines below. Cheekbones, could see, angular. Again, as I can see, there is nothing about custom. You see, I was sort of skimming, looking for custom, scanning for, words that would give me an idea about any custom, none of which was there. That helped me move faster. Now, main purpose of the description in lines 33 to 37 is to, okay? 33 to 37. In the stone wall corridor, where the sunlight came in through enormous stiff mosquito screens over every window. Okay, so context, background. Anna clothes clung to her like another skin, sounded like another person, not her at all. Okay, identity crisis or so. Underscore, Jess's philosophical, none of that was there. Suggest the correspondence, physical, of course, yes, there was background, there was her perspective, so we could hold on to it. As you can see, I'm not choosing the answer. You cannot do that before looking at all of the answer choices. Portray Jess's thoughts about a Nigerian background, none of that was mentioned. Reveal, acceptance, new life, again, B is the answer. We move on to 8. So here, one of the things to be taken into account is that A kind of, A is the answer that you'd be probably tripping up on. You'd think that, oh yes, philosophy is mentioned, but then even if you were down to 2, even if you had been down to 2 between A and B, it's important to understand there was no underscoring. Even if that one suggestion about her new identity seemed philosophical to you, invoking a natural setting. The natural setting wasn't invoked because of this. Natural setting existed. And both of them, sort of juxtaposed each other. Moving on to 8. Series of questions in lines 38 to 41 serves primarily to portray, okay? 38 to 41. Should she answer to this name and by doing so steal the identity of someone who belonged here? Should she become, as if she wasn't already? So, confusion, grandfather's attachment, out of scope, because this was about her point of view, not her grandfather. Lack of familiarity with common Nigerian names, this was just about her Nigerian name. Concern about constructing a new sense of who she is, okay, could be because she was just, grappling with her new identity. Uncertainty about the roles, not about family roles at all. Therefore, C is my answer. I'm going to move on. 9 does not look like a line reference. 10 is a vocab in context question. So we're going to look at crisp in line 76. I'm going to read this part. She sat at a right angle from him, breathing out silence. So beautifully mentioned, okay? He sat very upright like her, she noted with surprise. His hands on his knees, the crisp lines of his white shirt, almost molding him. Okay, so along the lines of starched shirt. Abrupt, fragile, sharp, refreshing. It's not exactly, starch, so sharp it is. And then we're going to move back to answer the questions that we haven't already. 2 and 3 are your specific best evidence questions. So, for these specific paired questions, we just have to read the lines and we can then match the answer choices that sort of, match with the lines before we try and see which is the best match. But if you're running out of time, it's a good idea to answer 2 first and then just see, which lines had that answer. Based on the passage, which factor most decisively influences Jess's reaction to meeting her grandfather? Okay. 1 to 3. Stood, uncertain circle, greeted mother, shook hands with father. Right. Intimidating, indifference, concerns, ominous, none of that, so we can really eliminate here. 3 to 7. Mellower, smaller picture mother had painted for her over the years. Sudden irrational fear that he might start shouting at her. Okay, mother had painted a picture and fear. Therefore, definitely matches with D. So B matches with D. Mother's description of his temperament. Moving on to C, 8 to 10. Looked at her, put his hands, hips, more consternation. Cousin's mother laughed. Okay, again, does not seem to really match any of the answer choices. 12 to 15. His hands were big and square, spade-like palms. Okay, this is about his physical presence and mannerisms. So that's going to match with D. Naturally, we can eliminate B and C. Your choices are A and D or D and B. Taken, we have evidence to prove that, mother did paint a picture of him over the years, which gave her this reaction of irrational fear. Therefore, my answers are D and B. Whereas for A, although you do have physical presence, you do not have the effect, the cause, the influence on her reaction. Therefore, these are your answers. Then I'm going to move on to to number 4. By this time, it is expected that you have read the entire passage, so you should be able to answer these questions quickly. Action of Jess's father suggests that he less sociable. No, because he did befriend a man who was also into reading newspapers. So, definitely not less sociable. Imperfect understanding. Nope. Advocates for Jess to choose her own name. None of this was even given sort of scope. Wishes to promote Jess's introduction to her grandfather. Taken, she was left alone with him. D is my answer. And we are left with one more. Jess's second encounter with her grandfather differs from her first encounter because in the second encounter, Jess must face her grandfather without support from other members of her family. Okay, could be. True is more clearly startled. None of that was there. Became more confident. Ultimate approval out of scope. Little time to become acquainted before speaking to him again. No. So A is my answer. So I hope you've got a preliminary understanding of how to go about a passage and be able to solve the same as quickly as possible while also maintaining your level of accuracy, because remember, speed is not enough without accuracy. Have a great day.